After a while, my father was at sea. It was quite frightening because he was on destroyers, and there were two. I think I'm right. The Havelock and the Havelock, which were two destroyers. My father was on one of them, and one of them went down. My mother was absolutely desperate because she thought it was my father. It wasn't. So she nearly had a nervous breakdown at that point.
During the war, how often did he come home?
Oh, not a lot. I can't really say, because it all depended where the ship was coming in for refit. Very often the ships came into Liverpool. So several times my mother went up to Liverpool to see him. But he rarely got home by then to Gloucester, where we were living in Gloucestershire. Oh, about once every 6 months, something like that. That was quite exciting because he used to come home, and when the ship docked, a lot of the stores were distributed within the crew, and as my father happened to be going to America quite often, he used to come home with lots of lovely goodies like nylon stockings, which my mother loved, and polo mints. I remember polo mints and things like that. And yes, but not very often, about once every 6 months, something like that. Then it would only be for about a week at a time. My father never talked about his experiences during the war, even though he was away the whole of the time. He was on those dreadful Russian convoys where you couldn't dare touch any metal. However, the one story that he did let escape, no, the two actually, the sad one was that a passenger ship went down, and the survivors were a lot of women and children, and they were covered in oil. And the captain of the ship said, "Step forward, all the married sailors," my father being one of them. And it was the job, it was really for the dignity of the women and children, that they were married men, and so they were sensitive, and they had to clean the oil off these women and children. He was really upset about that one. So that's a sad story that my father told me. But another story that he did tell me, which I think is hilarious and typical of my father. The last one to leave the sinking ship is always the captain, except once, when it was Chief Petty Officer Mills. He was the last one to leave the ship because he'd left his money belt behind, and he wasn't going to leave his money belt behind, so he went back to collect it before he dived overboard.
After the war ended, your father would have returned home.
Yeah.
Did your home life return to normal?
It was difficult. It was very difficult because we'd lost the house, and I'd grown up. Well, we'd all grown up whilst he was away. We were more or less little children when he left. When we came out, we were stroppy adolescents, and to a degree we resented him. It was very hard for him. But he was such a kind man, and had a wonderful sense of humour. And though he was quite strong disciplinarian, you know, he was in the Navy, and he was very aware of young women in Portsmouth, what could happen to them, and so he kept us on a very tight rein. But he always made up for it somehow or other. You know, if he got very angry, I remember him getting very, very angry with me. And I said, I'm leaving home, I'm going to join the Wrens, I'm going to get away, and so forth and so on. And the next day he bought me a new blouse, and he said he was so sorry because he was so cross with me. He was that sort of man. Lovely, lovely man. That's my story.